Yo, what is up, everybody? So let's go back again. Another chapter from the story titled The Midnight Road, written by Ashley Schuletter. Remember to use the links in the description below. Show love to the author. Like, comment, and subscribe. Lutz twisted the steering wheel violently, and the ponderous car screeched its resistance to such treatment, fishtailing wildly across the road in long, snaking arcs before he was able to get control. Heart hammering from the near miss, the sheriff pointed the car at the shallow gravel shoulder and pulled over. His hands were clutching the steering wheel in a white-knuckle grip, and it took a moment of effort to release them. He killed the engine. For a long moment, the only sound was the quiet ticking of the engine as it cooled. Ahead of this curve, the trees would open on side at the beginning of the McGuire farm. Sorry about that, guys, finally managed to say. Officer Clarkson was looking at him with pure astonishment, as if he had just seen a mountain lion in the farmlands of Iowa. In the rearview mirror, Billy met his gaze with a dark look as the two officers unclipped their seatbelts and stepped out of the humid summer night. Immediately, something fell off, and the flesh on Lutz's arms crawled. He motioned for Clarkson to join him and released Billy from his cage in the back seat. Crossing to the trunk, Lutz pulled out his rifle and handed it to Deputy Clarkson. He grabbed the shotgun and two high-beam flashlights before closing the trunk. With a nod of understanding, he passed the shotgun and one of the flashlights to Billy Hudson. All of the boys and most of the girls in this region learned to shoot before they were 10 years old. Knowledge of firearms and firearm safety was deeply ingrained in the community, where almost everyone's deep freezers were stocked full of fresh venison every autumn. Lutz felt no hesitation about handing the kid a shotgun. The kid had sense, even if he was overly fond of drag racing. His driver's side door was still open. Lutz reached in to turn off the headlights and then thought twice. The dim light was all they had beside the heavy mag light he now carried opposite his service pistol. He left the cruiser lights running, closed the door to the car with a heavy thud, and the three of them turned to survey their surroundings. That odd feeling was still creeping up on the back of Lutz's neck, but it was still Billy who was able to give voice to his unease. All the bugs are quiet. Lutz listened carefully and realized he was right. This was high summer. The air was thick and humid, and it should have been filled with the chirps of insects. The nightly concerto of katydids, cicadas, and crickets were usually enough to drive a man half mad, but here there wasn't so much as the buzz of a mosquito. The only sound was the quiet tapping of the men's boots as they began walking north towards Bud McGuire's home. The light from the headlights didn't fail to penetrate the gloom ahead, and Lutz clicked on the high-power maglite. Next to him, Billy shouldered the shotgun, his smaller flashlight pressed with one hand under the barrel. Deputy Clarkson was at the ready with the long Winchester rifle at his shoulder. Normally used when a deputy needed to put down a wounded animal on the side of the highway, Lutz was immensely grateful just now for its solidly reliable presence. Lutz swept the flashlight in slow, careful strokes from one edge of the road to another. "Where did you say you saw this arm now, son?"
A little further ahead, I think. Maybe another 300 feet or so.
Lutz continued methodically, sweeping his flashlight from side to side. At the edge of the beam, he could make out the burned rubber made by tires suddenly skidding across the road. The tracks continued up the road, fading away into the darkness. The men were now far enough away from the relative safety of the car that its dim headlights could no longer assist in the penetrating gloom ahead. The beams from the two flashlights seemed to grow smaller and fainter as they walked in loose formation up the road. Abruptly, the burnt rubber skids made by Billy's tires came at an end about 6 feet in front of him. The three men all stopped together, staring dumbfoundedly ahead. In the beam of Billy's flashlight, on the edge of the road as it faded into shrub grass, was the arm of a human female. It had been torn crudely at the elbow, and bloody strings of meat hung from one end. The other end was wearing a thin gold wedding band around the ring finger. The nails were chipped and embedded with dirt. All the blood in his body seemed to rush to his head, and Lutz could feel his heartbeat pounding sickeningly in his temples. Deputy Clarkson gave a violent heave and turned to vomit quietly into the ditch on the other side of the highway. Lutz squatted down on his haunches near the severed arm and reached for a ballpoint pen he kept in his shirt pocket. Turning his head to take one more breath of unfouled air, he used the pen to lift one of the strips of flesh away from the wound. It had been almost shredded, and for one horrifying instant, the image of Lutz's late wife, venison jerky, came into his mind. Sour bile rose in his throat, and he fought against the urge to puke. What animal could do this to a person? What animal would bother? To his knowledge, there had never been reports of bear in this area, and any wolves had been killed off generations ago. Coyotes would take a chicken or a duck once in a while, but Lutz couldn't recall a single instance of them going after a small child, let alone a grown woman. Besides, these weren't the teeth or claw marks of a coyote. Whatever had done this had much longer teeth. A sudden snap from the forest on his left, and Lutz's blood turned to ice in his veins. Clarkson heard it too. His rifle was back at his shoulder in an instant, and he took a hesitant step towards the looming blackness. Next to him, Billy Hudson was utterly rigid, his fingers deathly white around the grip of the shotgun. Another snap in the darkness. Had that one been closer? He quickly swung the beam of the flashlight away from the grisly scene on the road, in the direction of the woods. It illuminated skeletal pines and waist-high thorn bushes. The light shone eerily on the narrow trunks of the pines. With their ladders of broken branches, the trees became rows of menacing spears, waiting to impale unwary travelers. The unnatural silence of the woods was oppressive. Lutz peered into the darkness, willing the shadows to separate into shapes. He focused on the edges of the light, where it faded into a thick and impenetrable blackness. He thought he could see shapes in the dark, looming patches of shadow that were somehow blacker than the night. A hulking figure dancing just out of his field of vision. But nothing came charging at them from out the woods. After a long moment, Lutz relaxed his posture. Telling himself unconvincingly that he had been a deer, Lutz turned back to Billy. They now had evidence of a death, but not necessarily evidence of a crime. There was still work to be done, where they could all go home. Did you say there were more bodies?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Just come see for yourselves.
Clarkson looked bewildered by the answer, but rolled his eyes and shrugged. Alright, let's get this done, Sheriff. This place is giving me the fucking creeps. Hearing his deputy admit apprehension somehow served to boost Lutz's own confidence. The forest was now at his back, and he felt watchful eyes on them, but he shook off his nerves. Nodding affirmation at Billy, he confirmed, "Let's get this the fuck over with and go home." Leaving the lone, pitiful arm on the side of the highway, the men now began skirting the edge of the cornfield that bordered Bud McGuire's home. The corn, which should have towered over them at full height of 6 feet, was sickly looking and scrawny. This actually offered Lutz some comfort. The weakened stalks of the malnourished crops made it easier for the beam of the maglite to pierce the fields. Looming ahead, set back nearly a quarter-mile from the edge of the highway, was the McGuire house. At first, it looked much the same when Lutz had paid his visit 8 years previously, but the disrepair of the home became increasingly apparent as they turned onto the loose gravel driveway. At the start of the path was the rust-eaten mailbox, leaning precariously on its weathered wooden post. The McGuires had obviously failed to keep up with their correspondence. He wondered idly how Bud took care of things like electricity and plumbing if bills never came to their house. The main house must have been truly lovely in some bygone age. Its frame was a clean and crisp colonial, with gabled windows and a large wraparound porch. But the clean lines were obscured by a sagging roof and missing shutters. The porch was also drooping, with a dilapidated wicker couch sitting neglected in one corner. What must once have been cheerful white paint and blue trimming was now gray and peeling in great strips from the wood. The whole house had an air of exhaustion, like a once proud old horse that no longer had the energy to hold its head up in the traces. The front door was hanging open by one twisted hinge. As the men approached, Lutz held up one hand curled into a fist as a signal to hold position. His earlier jitters had cleared away, replaced by the curiously detached feeling he always felt when he was approaching a crime scene that was sure to be unpleasant. Normally, it was a high school kid who partied too hard or wrapped his car around a tree, or a trucker who came home drunk and decided to put his wife in the morgue. After 30 years in the sheriff's department, Lutz was no longer a stranger to the violence inherent in men. But it wasn't a man that tore that child's arm off, though. As if to confirm this chilling thought, Lutz shone his flashlight on the broken door of the house. Scratched deep into the wood, deep enough that the door was nearly splintered into pieces, were 4 parallel gouges running from the top of the doorframe to the bottom corner in one long, unbroken arc. The aluminum doorknob was twisted out of shape and hung uselessly to one side. Beyond the door lay only more darkness. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of chapter 3.